You know, guys, the exception doesn't make the rule. Greetings, I'm JC Pilcher, and this is JCPC Apologetics. Well, hello, and welcome to another Monday, and another episode of Bad Arguments. And I say that kind of funny because I wasn't sure whether I was going to make this a bad argument video or if I was going to make it a regular video. I eventually decided to throw it into the bad argument category literally like 5 seconds before I started shooting because it really is an argument that I hear a lot of people make, and it's a bad one, and we need to address it as such, I think. And this basically is the notion of when we have discussions around things that aren't necessarily commanded in Scripture, but it's pretty strongly suggested, and we say, hey, here in our context, this is the best way that we can work this out. There's always those people who want to scream legalist, but we've already dealt with that. You can check out the video on legalism. And then others will say, well, okay, I see where you have a point, but in my situation, it doesn't work out. Therefore, what you're saying is wrong. Americans are the kings of making rules out of exceptions. And that is wrong. We shouldn't make rules from the exceptions. We should be aiming for an ideal that we realize we can't live up to. This is the fact of, being a Christian. Jesus' command to us was to be perfect. Be perfect. That's a pretty high standard, a really high ideal. And he told us, be perfect. That was not a suggestion, that was a command. Have you been perfect? I don't think so. Your circumstances might make it impossible for you to be, perfect. And by your circumstances, I mean the fact that you are human and imperfect. That is God's command, though. It doesn't change the fact that that's what he requires of us is perfection. But we don't say, well, we ought to just accept living like an absolute pagan because we can't live up to that standard. But that's how a lot of people reason on other subjects. And just so I can give you a little background to help you understand where I'm coming up with all this stuff, I was on, I think it was Facebook the other day, and there was a discussion going on, which I found very interesting, one that I'm very passionate about myself, and that is homeschooling and public schooling. The reality is that 90%, last I heard, 90% of Christians, people who call themselves Christians, send their kids to public schools. Now, for years, I'm talking about my parents' generation, public school is really not a legitimate option for a Christian. 90% of Christians do wrong in that area, and I know that most people who are watching this video will probably unsubscribe from me or dislike this video because I'm saying that, but sending your kid to a godless public school is wrong. It is sinful. You shouldn't do that, period. Here's the reality. You can't separate worldview from from academics. You will teach a worldview alongside academics. And so when you have a public school that claims that it's neutral, what that means is that it's basically teaching atheism. And that's what we've seen. We've got a generation of millennials especially who have come up and they live like atheists. They might call themselves Christians, they might call themselves, but they're humanists, they're atheists in their worldview and the way that they live. And this has come about because we basically send our kids the majority of them into pagan schools. And Jesus made it very clear that when a person is trained, they will become like their master. If their master is a pagan, or in this case, a pagan curriculum, because I already know people will say, but there's Christian teachers in those public schools. Yes, but those Christian teachers aren't the teachers. The curriculum, the pagan curriculum is. And more often than not, the Christian teachers that I've met, they've basically been indoctrinated in that worldview. I've met very few Christian teachers who were not really pagan when you get down to what they believed. Sadly, more often than not, it affects them more than they affect the system. But that's another example of trying to make a rule out of the exception. Because one teacher is Christian in this school, it's okay for me to send them there. But yeah, Jesus said very plainly, you will be like your teacher when you are fully trained. And if your teacher is pagan, you're going to have pagan worldview when you come out. Now, what this leads me to is that example I was talking about. One of the common objections that I saw on this thread on Facebook, I guess the thread's Twitter, whatever, post on Facebook was, well, what about the single mom who can't afford to homeschool her kids? What about the single mom who can't afford to send her kids to a Christian school? What about that person? In that case, I say, I can see in that situation where it will be tolerable for them to send their kid to public school. Hopefully there's a church out there generous enough to somehow, or family or someone who will help put their kids through a Christian school. But that is very, very different and a unique circumstance. And very often the people who are making that excuse were basically arguing, because there's a mom out there who can't send their kids to can't homeschool her kids. Me, who is a mom with a husband with plenty of income, it's okay for me to send my kid to a godless public school. You've made a rule for yourself out of the exception of another person. There are ideals. There are many things in the Bible that are commanded of us that are ideals that we never will fully attain to. Even that homeschooling family, who's been doing it faithfully for years, they're not doing it as ideally as they could. We shoot for perfection. We shoot for what is best, knowing that, yes, there will be some difficult circumstances that may not allow your brother or your sister over there to reach as far as you. But we still shoot for that goal. We still shoot for that standard, that ideal standard. But what we have is more often people who are exceptions, people who have circumstances in their lives that prevent them from being able to accomplish what you're doing, saying, hey, because I can't do that, I got to drag you guys down to my level. Or more often than not, people are saying, because that person's down there, it's okay for me to be down there. We can see from scripture that God does not give us all the same. God does not give us all the same circumstances. That's one of the reasons why I reject woke Christianity so much. It says that we all ought to be the same. It says that a God that gives 1 talent to this guy, 5 talents to this guy, and 10 talents to the next guy, that God is evil. And so that's why I reject Tim Keller, as I've been kind of bashing recently. That's why I reject his stuff and all of woke Christianity, because it says that God is unjust. And that they are just and that they have a better standard than God's standard. But God does not gift us all equally. Yes, the 1 talent servant will not be able to pull off what the 5 and the 10 talent servant is. That's no excuse for the 5 and the 10 talent servant to live up to the standard or only produce what the 1 talent servant does. Just because a guy does not have as much as you doesn't give you an excuse to be an underachiever. God's going to judge you based on what he's given you. He's not going to judge you based on what he gave your brother. And so I see people using exceptions, really tough circumstances of other people in order to basically underachieve, for lack of better words. So yes, there are exceptions to every rule. That doesn't destroy God's standard. That's basically moral relativism. And we don't believe in that as Christians. Do what you can, the very best with what you've got. And don't be like Peter, who, when he's under the gun from Jesus, basically says, hey, what about this guy? What about John? Don't distract from yourself. Yes, there are people out there with difficult circumstances. God ain't worried so much about his circumstances when it comes to what he's placed in your life to do. So that's about all I got to say. The exceptions do not make the rule. You strive for the best that you can attain with what you've got. Don't live less. Don't compromise because somebody else can't quite live up to the standard that you're living to. And for you people who are unable, stop feeling judged all the time by people who are able. Don't be jealous of people who are able, but pray that by the grace of God that he will increase your ability and that you may one day live up to a higher standard. Chances are he might give you that opportunity. But I make no promises that God does not make. So with that said, if you've come to this video and you're not a believer, I've got a video that I'm going to leave linked after this one's over called What is the Gospel? And in there, I will explain to you people what we Christians believe when we talk about the gospel. That really is the ultimate goal of this channel. Discipleship is great and apologetics is great, but first and foremost, before those things are any benefit to you, you need to hear the gospel. And I would ask that you click on that video, and if you are a believer, that you would as well, so that your faith will be confirmed, or you might find out that you're one of those people who have been in church for years and never heard the gospel. You will find that there are far more out there than you would ever expect. But with that said, I gotta go. God bless, have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment below and feel free to like and share it so others can see it as well. Also, subscribe so that you can keep up to date on future videos. And as always, please check below to see resources that I've used that might help you further your studies. God bless and have a great day.